Digest After Dark, and we're back. Unfiltered and uncensored talk from young alumni of historically black colleges and universities and advocates of the same. Glad to be with you again. We got Laurel by way of A&T, candy corn connoisseur. Winston, Winston getting them into school. And Tiff yet to be thrown off the show. So we got a lot of stuff to get to today. First, I think it's appropriate because by the time you hear this episode, we will have experienced the memoriam and celebration of HBCU alumnus, a distinguished HBCU executive, and a distinguished lawmaker at the federal level, Representative Elijah Cummings. Again, by this airing, even though we're taping it preliminarily, by the time you will have heard this, his service will have passed. Earlier this week, services were held at Morgan, where he served as or Morgan's Board of Regents for more than 19 years. Really helped Morgan and many HBCUs collect millions and millions of dollars for programming. Transportation stands out as one of his issues that he really championed. A lot of interface with corporations. He helped to bridge the gap between the schools and the sector and those businesses. So, you always think in a political process, what do congressmen and senators do, or congresspersons and senators do? They do a lot, considering that they control the purse strings, and they do a lot for their respective states and jurisdictions and districts. So, we will give you guys the floor to talk about some of the fond memories you would have of Elijah, particularly because two of us have ties to Howard. I think it's even that much more appropriate as he was a graduate of Howard. So even though we have a lot of Howard bias on this show by way of Tiff, I will let you start because that's your fellow Bison.
You're wild. But no, I woke up that morning and I thought it was a joke. I'm not even gonna hold you. I'm like, why are y'all killing people today? Like, what is going on? And then I fully wake up and I see the timeline, like, this is actually not a joke, not a drill. And I'm just like, I actually can't do this today. Because you don't at this point of where we are in America and where we are in our policy making and how it really is people's whole lives on the line and livelihoods on the line and ways of being on the line, we don't need somebody like Elijah Cummings to have died. And that sounds like really, I think that sounds terrible, like when I verbalize it, because you don't want to have to depend on somebody or just see them for their usefulness to your life. But when they're like a lawmaker or a policy maker, like that's how you know them to be, and that's how how they shape what it is that you're going to live like or live through. So in that way, that's mostly how I view Elijah Cummings. I've met him once, just in passing, because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I had class with one of his daughters, but that is the extent of everything. But I was shocked, even though I know these people are up in age, but you still don't expect them to die, even though everybody dies, but you still don't expect them to die. Especially now, we have so much work to be done. Hey, you can't die yet.
That's one of the things when you're larger than life.
Yeah.
Even if you're sick, and he was sick for a number of years.
Right.
And in the latter years, it was becoming visibly so. When you see this guy, with a walker, and a guy that's known for screaming on people in Senate, in House chambers. And he was still screaming on people in terms of the impeachment hearings. He was still going in on people, but a larger than life figure, when you see them, start to physically diminish, it still is something that kind of knocks you off balance. The only times I can remember having that experience, I agree with you, Tiffany, it's shocking, right? Especially for people here in Baltimore. Because even though this isn't my city, the city has adopted me. And so I feel, how a lot of Baltimoreans feel and have adopted a lot of their sensibilities. And this, this town kind of got quiet about that everywhere. even though we all knew he was sick. I mean, it's almost akin to like when Muhammad Ali died. It's like you could see he was sick. You could see he's not the same. And then when he's gone, it's like, what is that for real? You're just larger than life, so you can't imagine life without that kind of cat in there. Laurel, you have ties to HU, deep ties to A&T. Elijah was somebody who fought for, better resources and better opportunities for HBCUs at large. What were your impressions of his life and now reflections on, in the midst of his death?
I mean, for me, like, especially not being a student of Howard, but more so still on paper, a resident of Maryland, especially with the comments of recent, which kind of makes it even more sick, like with the whole back and forth with Trump and the rat-infested Baltimore nonsense. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, of course, Trump is insulted. It's like, who hasn't he insulted? But it's also just more insulting that he would say those things about someone who's actually, like, one, has the receipts in terms of, his education and the work he's done, but also that even despite, him hiding how his health was failing and things like that, he was still doing the work every day and made it a point to say that, we can't let, all of this nonsense lie and we have to be active members of society. And then at least that, I think it also highlights, especially even when someone dies, I think sometimes the silver lining is that for the people who weren't aware of everything they did while they were alive, they actually might be more interested to find out, okay, wow, they actually had a lot of reach and all of these things. Mm-hmm. Granted, I wish I knew that, when they were here, but, at least I can see that they've left a legacy behind, and it's on the rest of us to kind of carry the torch. And also that he was basically the same age as my father. Mm. So that kind of made it more personal that, this is not someone who is like 93 years old.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Like, I personally don't think someone in their 60s, that's not old to me.
Right.
So, it speaks to a lot of things. I think in all of this Trump stuff, I hope that people can use this as a catalyst for being more involved at whatever level in politics, and even just as, a voter, and paying attention to not just who's running for executive office, but like who's in your local state legislature and what are they doing? Mm-hmm. Especially the people that look like us, those who have gone to HBCUs, and even those who haven't, but like, what are they actually doing? What are the policies they're standing behind? What are the issues that they consistently vote for or vote against? And not just getting online and complaining, but like, being active. Because I know lately for my father and my aunts and uncles, because of this, they've gotten more active in like their districts and even at the county level, and like, putting the fire to people who've been in office for the past 12, 15 years, but saying like, okay, we're trying to meet with you. You keep canceling on us. You're not doing it. This is not going to work.
People getting fed up. And when you realize you don't have as many fighters on the field as you once had, it's that much more imperative. Winston, still with ties in Detroit, what is it like for, obviously he was a national figure. I think the three of us have, kind of a local painted opinion of Elijah, but what was it like from a different city and a really politically savvy city like Detroit to see somebody like that pass away?
So I think for us, because we do talk so much, I'm working for a mentorship program in the city of Detroit. So much of what we try to instill in our young people is being aware, being civically aware, being aware in general of the surroundings, what goes on in the world, and having a figure like Elijah Cummings, who represented so many positive things as a black male, as an HBCU alum, and someone who really embodied the idea of speaking truth to power. And we talk a lot to our young people of color about what that means and the importance of being engaged and doing things like that. I think he was a prime example of what that is, and doing that and doing it intellectually, doing it as some would say, as only an HBCU graduate would have the ability to articulate and express those things that mattered, and being able to speak those things and in the rooms and spaces that it needed to be brought up. I think it leaves a gaping hole. Laurel, speaking of her family being more engaged now since his loss, I think it's a reminder of us to, several people have recently said, Harry Belafonte and other folks, talking about who's going to take the torch, who's going to continue this conversation in these spaces, in the ways that it's required for us to progress, the ways to be expected. I mean, I think Elijah's presence rung not just locally, even though locally he was a champion for, Maryland and those things, but his ability to, like I said, to speak the things that mattered, that affected a lot of people, not just at a local level, but at a national level. And I think it's important to understand the ability that we have and the what's important, the value in doing those things, the obligation and that we have to make sure that we are aware and speaking the things that matter, and that we have people in those spaces, in those rooms who are comfortable, who understand the value and the necessity to speak those things. So he represented all of the best of those qualities, and he's the kind of example as a mentor that I would definitely, that you lean to for young people to understand what it means and what it looks like. If we're trying to paint the picture, Elijah Cummings was that picture.
Yeah, man. I mean, and the good thing about this is, normally when you hear of a death of a really distinguished figure like this, particularly in sports, you always think like, man, are we going to see somebody else like that? I think for Elijah and in politics, we are going to see somebody else like that. One, because and from an HBCU. And I think that's an exciting part about this, not his death, but I think that you can easily see somebody like a Randall Woodfin, who's a mayor in, is it Birmingham? Birmingham. A lot of the new elected officials who are coming to Congress, part of the new wave, at least from the Democratic side of the aisle, legislators of color who are coming to, Capitol Hill to make changes, and they're not being silent about it. And this, in a lot of ways, Elijah, people know him from Capitol Hill work, but he had a first act in Maryland State Legislature, and he was our first African-American, Speaker of the House. So that, for him to have two acts, to be known better for one of them and on such a big stage as that, it's good to know that there are other people who got to see him and can mold kind of their outlook on politics and working for people and with people from his example, that at least up until his last days, he was still somebody who was visible. He was still somebody who was active. Again, when I think of him yelling on people. I always thought that was funny, that he yelled on people in the chambers like a true Baltimorean. So that was all, and he brought that to politics. And as you said, Winston, it wasn't like he was out of order or incoherent with it. He was sharp. He knew his stuff, and he knew how to relate to people, and people backed down when if he started yelling and leaning forward over that microphone. Everybody better chill out and just listen for a minute, because obviously he's getting fed up with something, and usually he was getting fed up with something that was not being done right for the people. And I think that's hard to do. It's hard to get black people who were born with a certain cynicism about structure and systems and politics, because they've for so long have worked against us, to see somebody use that to our advantage was a big deal. And Maryland and Baltimore, Black America certainly owe Elijah a lot. And so certainly throughout this week, respects will have been paid, and today, and going forward, when you look at the lives of the people who will come after him. So we will take that and transition out of this segment into the next one. I believe we are going to be talking about a pretty historic gift for Allen University in South Carolina, and then have a conversation about philanthropy across the HBCU landscape. This is Not Just After Dark. We'll be right back. Dodgers After Dark, and we're back. Just wrapped up a conversation, reflections on Representative Elijah Cummings. And now we're going to get into a dialogue about a historic gift to Allen University in South Carolina, $500,000 from a family foundation.
Yep.
And that's a big deal for that school. It's one of the smaller HBCUs, but growing really in its imprint in that part of the state, acquiring a lot of property. If you listen to the HBCU Digest radio series, we recently had President Ernest McNeely on, who talked about building a football team, building an athletic program, building up the academics. And it's just something in the water down at Allen, that now a family foundation has taken notice and given a pretty sizable historic gift to that school. So I would ask you guys that, in the shadows of all the Black Twitter discussion about how Howard Morehouse and Spelman get all the money, what was the reaction to see Allen? Maybe it wasn't a $34 million gift or a $13 million gift,
We're not gonna compare it like that.
like Robert Smith and Oprah gave to Morehouse, but that's still that $500K is a lot of money.
Exactly.
And anybody would
For
be glad to
Allen.
have it. And particularly for Allen, which is not, if somebody said, hey, quick, name 15 HBCUs, Allen would be on nobody's list.
It would be on my list.
Shut up.
Live.
You would say
No,
Howard,
no,
Howard,
I
Howard,
mean,
Howard, 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 Fisk.
No.
Other
You don't say-
other AME schools, Howard.
No. No. But I will say, and like I said to you earlier and privately, nobody talked about this. I shared it,
Which is my fault.
and I'm sorry.
Which is my fault too, because I didn't talk about it.
Well, yeah, but you inquired about it.
Laurel happy that
There's that.
Laurel happy that
But
I'm
like-
embarrassed.
As you should be.
But like for everybody to complain about the trifecta plus always quote always getting money and always in the news, ain't nan one of these HBCU for the pride Instagrams and Twitters post about Allen University receiving $500,000.
They may not have known. It
Shade.
wasn't.
No.
It wasn't
No.
publicized.
Because it's the luxury of
Because
not
the not knowing argument is,
that don't fly.
it's a red herring, because people know, they just don't care.
Did
How
they
many
know?
times do I tell you, Jared? Facts don't matter.
No,
They
now you
don't
may have a point
matter.
there. You may have a point there, because I would say this: it's not like Allen has relationships with the Root or the Washington Post. So when
I
stuff
don't
like that
care.
breaks, it's not like they're getting to the largest outlets. They get to the black outlets, because I did get
But
it.
we're not the but check it. These HBCU for the pride Instagram pages, social media platform pages are not mainstream either.
You may.
They all they have to do is concentrate on the 100, sometimes up to 107 institutions that we have. If you mean to tell me that you are not, in your little team or whoever you got, you're not even paying attention to who y'all say don't get money, especially, stop talking to me. Stop tweeting, stop posting, because you're not in it
Now
to even represent them.
Now,
You're
to be fair to me, I did ask, when I saw that story, I immediately responded and asked them a question, which was, is this the largest gift in school history? Because I would have taken personal pride in being able to report, hey, this is the biggest gift the school has ever received. I haven't heard back from them yet. I expect that I will, especially after
and
this.
one of the things that I read, I think from the Christian Record, they said it's one of the biggest. So it's not the biggest.
That's
but
what they said in
one
the
of
press
the
release, one of it. So I wanted to
Right.
make sure, because they may have said that just to CYA, not knowing if it was, but they didn't have the
Right.
information
And
readily
that-
available.
We still don't know.
Look, they was just so excited. They just had to get the news out. They didn't have
They
time
did, and I feel it.
tie
I feel it.
laces and
And that's fine.
cut off edges. And
So, but cut off edges. But
Wait a minute, what?
So when you say that, isn't it almost like well, first let me say this, to Laurel's point, there is a point about large gifts going unnoticed, because I've seen over the last 3 years at a minimum that a lot of alumni scholarship galas at a lot of HBCUs have been breaking records. So I know off the top of my head, Texas Southern has broken a record. Philander Smith raised $1 million this year in one night. Shaw raised like $940,000 in a night. Alabama A&M broke a record. I was at that gala. So these schools are getting sizable donations, and they're having record-breaking events for scholarship donations, and they aren't making the Washington Post, the Root, USA Today, all these places, the AJC, all these places that we're so happy about, Oprah and Robert Smith. I would ask you guys, do you think that is because just the numbers, that $1 million is not comparable to $13 million, or is it just that these are celebrity donors?
I think you have to take into account. I think it should matter based on the amount given to the school and where the school is and what it will do and what it means for the school.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not dedicated to reporting with that type of nuance and context, then you're not going to do it. You're not, and I'm going to expect that you do it because it's
Mm-hmm.
not what you care about. You don't report about this stuff on a daily. I got other things to talk about.
Now, to me, it's always a big deal. If you're going
Right.
over, to me,
But that's
if you're going over 100 grand, that's a big deal to me.
but this
But that's
also
just our standard of philanthropic impact. Would you say? I mean, Laurel, you've been a part of two campuses that do pretty well in terms of name recognition. Is it the number or is it the celebrity factor? Because I think that makes a difference in schools' strategy in trying to attract these kind of gifts. They may say, well, the number is good, but maybe we need to focus more on celebrity or high profile donors so that we can get the marketing exposure as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think some things are just because it's someone famous, say Beyonce, and then also which school they're giving to, who is already, somewhat of a household name, like Howard. But other times, I think sometimes the planets just align, and for whatever reason, this little news blurb just blows the hell up. Or like for someone like Robert F. Smith, who is not a celebrity, his gift or the way he gave was different.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also at Morehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Or like the Oprah situation at Morehouse is because it's Oprah.
Mm-hmm.
And then people who are paying attention even further, Oprah is also HBCU alum, but we're not going to talk about that right now. But I think it's just different things. Or like the case with A&T a few years ago, where it was mostly us that were quote unquote upset over the clock tower that they built in the middle of campus, and it cost $1 million. And so people just heard the $1 million and got upset and said, why are you going to spend all this money to build this damn clock tower? We need computer labs, which was true. We need all this other stuff, not realizing that the gift was from an alumnus.
Yeah.
And that's what I won't say willed because he's not dead, but
that's what he wanted.
That's what he wanted to give to the school.
Right.
And he was not famous. He was just an alum. And so in the Allen University
he's not giving
case,
anything else.
Yeah, and he's not giving anything else.
You'll hurt that relationship because you think that's not what should be given, and it's like you don't get to tell somebody what to give and how they give it.
It's like beggars can't be choosers. Not to call us beggars, but it's kind of like if you're telling alumni, like, hey, don't forget to think of us when you're making your will or leaving your deed of your trust to the school, blah 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 blah. And people are kind of like, for other reasons that I think are more complicated within the Black community, sometimes that's not always possible. Other times people do give, but like we said, no one really cares because facts don't matter. Or even in the case of Allen University, these people that left the money were not alum.
They went to PWIs. They're not even given in their education range.
But a lot of times you will see with these donors, they will, even if they have no direct connection, my mom went to such and such, my dad went to such and such, or my aunt or my favorite teacher went here, so I want to endow a scholarship. There's a lot of connections that I think that Black folks, and particularly affluent Black folks, will find because they want to give to an HBCU, so they will search for an opportunity to say, here's the one I'm giving to, and here's the reason why. Here's the big question that we got to deal with, and I think it relates to the haves and the have-nots. And Winston, I'll throw this one at you. So the conversation on Black Twitter is stop giving so much money to these elite HBCUs, right? But is there an argument to be made about schools that can, or at least showcase the capacity to do more with it and have a track record of doing more with it, versus smaller institutions where the gift would be transformative, but it still wouldn't put them on the level of a Morehouse or a Howard or an A&T or a Morgan? I mean, is there it's investment, it's basic investment. You go with a winner. Like, so what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I know. I think I think there's value in, and I think it's been said before. I think Ors and other folks have commented on social media about there's value in making that investment in a student. Howard's track record, Spelman's track record, Morehouse track record of the alumni and students that have come out of there and what they're doing. I also think there's room for a narrative change for maybe an institution that does not have the same level of track record, but who is accepting students who may not otherwise have a chance, and what they're able to do with students who maybe don't have ideal profiles, and what we know of how they come out of a Philander Smith or a Benedict or Haristo or etc. And they've done going on to do amazing things because the school invested in them. I think there's room for those HBCUs maybe to have more conversations about, hey, you might want to invest in us for these reasons. I'm speaking, openly or maybe not as much knowledge as far as what they are doing in that space, but I do think there's room to have more from just a local conversation and basic level. I think folks don't think about it in that way, and I think there's a lot of value in making investments in those institutions who invest in students who may not have as many other options or chances. And some of the amazing things and stories and outcomes have been able to come on that. But I do think, yes, it's very real that, folks hear the buzzword. They hear, oh, you went to Howard, or you went to North Carolina A&T, and you're doing these amazing things. While I definitely want to put an investment into those institutions, because I know I've seen the product of those institutions and what they've been able to do.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's just a underlying fear of scarcity, and maybe feeling like, okay, remember when I said before where I was like, Black people don't want to collaborate, and so I feel like there's a sense that, okay, if these 3 or whatever school institutions are quote unquote always getting gifts and always getting money and always getting these large donations and nobody else is, which isn't true. It makes it seem as if all the money's just going to them and then there's no money left for the rest of us, and that's not true. And then also, I think people need to understand too that just because a school is getting certain funds, you don't know what their books look like,
right?
You don't know what, like with the Oprah gift, that was money, the 30-year later gift from money she donated 30 years ago for a scholarship fund.
Right.
It's not just random bags of money getting dropped off and bam, a new student union. Like, I think people forget that even if you only want to give your school $25, you can designate where that $25 goes.
Yep.
Or if you're leaving a trust, you can designate in the trust, okay, I'm going to leave you guys $750,000, and I want you to use this money to build XYZ. When I was at High Point, they did the same thing. There was a dorm on campus, some random person who wanted to be anonymous, they left $1 million, and they said, you can have this money as long as you build a dorm and name it Blessing. And that's what they did. So I think, I'm not saying we all just have to have $1 million floating around and building random dorms on our campuses, but I feel like whatever you're giving, I think that we get caught up in that it has to be this high amount, and then also magically assuming that just because someone gave a high amount, that this is going to be distributed on the campus in a certain way, or it's going to go to just this one program and nowhere else. Or even if it does, that doesn't mean that, everybody else is going to slack off.
Right. I think also to Laurel's point about collaboration, people feel some type of way about the Trifecta Plus getting all of this money, but fail to realize you need the Trifecta Plus to get further. Like, you have the same opportunity after you've earned your bachelor's degree at your HBCU that doesn't necessarily fall in the quote Trifecta Plus. You have the ability, you will be prepared to pursue grad school at a Howard, at A&T, at wherever else, insert maybe Morehouse College of Medicine or School of Medicine. You will be prepared. You need for them to get the money that they need.
When we come back, a conversation on, I can't make up my mind if we should talk about Trump or we should talk about the other thing when we come back.
Wait, what's the other thing?
It was Trump and one other thing.
Oh, the HBCU-ish.
The HBCU-ish t-shirt. Yeah, we'll do that next. That is After Dark. That is After Dark, and we're back coming at a sensitive topic that was on, what was that, Instagram or Facebook?
It's sensitive topic. People are sensitive.
It's sensitive in my house. It's sensitive for my well-being. The HBCU-ish t-shirt that surfaced maybe a couple weeks ago, and I think that it surfaced originally at Temple University in Philadelphia, which has a sizable black population. To be fair, my wife, who frequently sits in on the recording with me, also known as the silent partner on the Petty Ass podcast, is a Temple grad. And even she in her remarks said, you know what, that's a little bit too much. Temple's not an HBCU. I don't think that the culture or the nomenclature should be leveraged that way. What was the reaction you guys had when you saw it and you saw all the discussion about it?
Stares directly into the camera.
Wow.
I would just like to say that I think if we were like drawing a relationship low web, cousins would be the PWI blacks who think their PWI or traditionally white institution can be HBCU-ish, and the black HBCU students who like to tell other HBCU students that y'all don't need no more money. Like I think all of that is rooted in insecurity to some extent. Like, you made your decision. There are pros and cons to every decision that we will make in this life. You chose to attend a PWI. You chose to attend the HBCU that you attend. Pros and cons to it.
But we talked about this before. So there are two things. An HBCU is unique in this way. It represents two things. It represents a operational or a functional part of life, which is a school that trains people for professions, right? That's one thing that an HBCU is. And then there's this notion that an HBCU is a culture, a lifestyle. It is. A lifestyle or a culture of camaraderie among black folks, among educated black folks, among folks who enjoy the stick-to-itiveness and stick-togetherness that a school provides. So when you think about the form and culture of it, I don't get that black students at PWIs are saying, hey, we think that our school, or we think that our BSU, or we think that our black homecoming or our black graduation is like an HBCU. I don't think that they're talking about the form of it. And I don't mind if they're saying if black students and black people use the term, the simple four letters HBCU to represent black academic culture. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I get why it's offensive. I feel it in my spirit as an HBCU graduate. But maybe I'm just sick and twisted like that. But I like that black people can look at our schools and look at our culture and say, the culture of black people enjoying each other in an academic environment is HBCU.
Except it's not when you're on the campus of a traditionally white institution.
But do you understand? It's almost like saying if you know, when they say it's lit like an HBCU homecoming, yeah, it may not be. But what if you were at a black cookout and they said that? Would you be as offended?
I mean, I think the real tension here is the fact that it's not really just this singular issue. It's the fact that that's usually, if someone is talking about an HBCU that has not been to one, does not go to one, their first point of reference is always the more so surface,
the party in the booth,
quote, fun things like
the most fun thing, right?
And the cultural aspect, but then the first sign of insert something happening at a Howard this month, then they're the first ones to, down it and talk about, oh, y'all don't have this and y'all ain't got that, y'all broke down, blah blah blah.
But so what else could they use though in a setting? In other words, it's not like you see people at a convocation and say, "Oh yeah, it's lit like an HBCU convocation," or you know what I mean? It's not right. But there's nothing else that people could look at from Instagram or Facebook or some outward facing function and say, "This is HBCU culture." Like, our classrooms, it's not like, "Yeah, we lit in this lecture."
But also,
you know what I mean? Like,
wait a minute. It depends on where you go, because convocations are here. Like you said,
no, yeah, they can get that way.
Right. And at Howard, they were nice too. And my classes at Howard, in my major and in my minor, were lit. That is what it is. But that's because I had.
The classes weren't lit. They were engaging. Y'all were not hired up. Y'all were not stomping around in class. Y'all were engaged in the class.
That's more than one definition. Thank you very much. Dr. Carr class. You can't tell me otherwise. But I was going. that when we talk about in terms of in recruiting our own students, if we consistently, I don't even want to say but encourage this whole HBCU-ish attitude in terms of PWIs or PWIs, that's going to make it harder for us to recruit.
No, I do
Because
agree with that.
people will think
Yes, it would. I mean, it worked. I saw.
No,
it
I said I do
online.
agree. I do agree with that.
Oh, I'm saying that I think it happens too at traditionally white institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Mentioning High Point again. I had a case where I was like in the middle of my freshman year, my only year there, and you know how someone always has their girlfriend's niece's best friend that is going to college and looking at colleges. Can they shadow you? Blah blah
Mm-hmm.
blah. And so she came down during one of High Point's open houses, and so High Point, which is like Pleasantville in higher ed form, they throw out for open house, because that's how they got me there. They throw out all the stops. So like as soon as you get there, you riding around campus in a golf cart, and they got the promenade with all the international flags. And then when they have the food, they got the salmon, they got the shrimp, they got the roast beef. Then they have the pep rally, and you're getting all this free stuff. And I told her straight up, I was like, yeah, like don't get caught up in all of this. It's an illusion. It's not like this
It's an
every day.
illusion.
Like I'm starving out here for real. I'm broke. Like this school is expensive. And of course the response I got was, yeah, okay, whatever. So she went on and applied, got into High Point and went. By then I had already transferred to A&T.
Mm-hmm.
Then I ran into her later when I came back to visit. And then she comes to me and she was like, yeah, I remember what you told me. You were right. I'm trying to leave and go to
Exactly.
Chapel Hill. And
I'm
so
trying to
it's
go to
just like,
Chapel Hill. It's the
yeah. Look. This is a whole other thing.
So like
I
that's
said.
a problem.
But yeah, it's the same thing. So especially in terms of doing recruitment and working with admissions, and granted, all schools do this. All schools are trying to sell you,
Yeah.
so that you enroll into their school because they need their money.
Now, to be
just
fair,
like-
HBCUs do it too. They showcase the best of the best the week of
Yes,
open
really.
house.
Everybody does.
But also-
Everybody does.
But I
But
just feel
the
like there's a
difference is we're not necessarily covering up a culture
Right.
Right.
or
right.
a campus that isn't dedicated to our black being and doing and education.
Come on.
At a TWI, that ain't the case.
Well, Winston, how do you deal with that? So when you're working with students and they're choosing, particularly your high achieving students, where they know what college is all about, they probably came from a household that has someone who graduated from college, or even if they didn't, even if they're first generation and they just had exposure to a lot of people who can tell them about college. How do you deal with a Michigan State, for example, which knows how to throw a program that looks attractive to black people, and then you're balancing? They get their HBCU and they become HBCU adjacent, to speak, and then you start to you're comparing them with actual HBCUs. How do you distill? Here's the difference between the two to a 17 or an 18-year-old.
Please.
So
You're so mad.
So no. What you have to do.
Michigan, State is having their own issue right now. There really is no like. There's I don't even know if you've seen it. But
Before you go on a rant about Michigan, I don't need no Michigan bias. Winston, how do you
we can go there about Michigan too.
how do you do it, Winston?
No, I think the biggest thing, Ju, is just education. So, for the students that we get in our program, they come from all different walks of life. And I think the first step is always gauging, making sure we're not downplaying or saying anything is less than. So, and especially with any kind of conversations about an institution that may have more representation of blacks than some other predominantly white institutions, what we want to be clear on first place is that there's a difference between being a little bit more accepting of some different cultures and being rooted in a school that was built for you, by you, with you in mind, with the intent to you that is, that you're going to get a full education on. So it's going to be an inclusive and full education, not just on African Americans, but on people of color in general, and understanding the proper element of contributions to those, the books that you read, the professors you have, all those elements that are different than just going to school anywhere. So we got to have a conversation up front about understanding the value in those unique spaces and what they are and what they look like. So you don't get in the mindset of saying, oh, Temple or, Towson or whatever school is like this school. No, it's not. They may have a larger population of minority students than a lot of institutions that are like them. But be clear on they're not these schools because they were not made like this. These institutions were made specifically with you in mind and understanding what that looks like and making sure we're not saying it's less than. No, it's just different. This is the difference between this institution and that institution. I want you to understand that you can get a certain type of education at these institutions that's just as valuable, if not more, debatably in some spaces, to have this full, well-rounded education. Let's make sure you understand that it is that, and this is what it looks like, and that you don't, buy into any fallacies about
that you ain't
what's
fooled.
what.
Right. I agree with Tiffany's point wholeheartedly, and I never thought about it that way until she said it, which is to say that if you have a PWI or any other school, a community college for that matter, doing something that for at least for black students resembles an HBCU, that could be a tough sell because they can feel like, oh, I can have somewhat of an HBCU experience without, I guess, what they've been taught to believe is the bother or the burden of an HBCU.
And that's what they were saying on Facebook in the group. This one woman wanted to engage me. She's like, I had a very affirming experience at my 2 PWIs, and I was like, girl, you think that was affirmation? Try actually developing your black identity at an HBCU.
Maybe, but it's not to say there are a lot of black folks who have had culturally enriching experience at PWIs. That's
only if you were good when you got there. If you were broken and going to a TWI, that's a 50-50 chance. You might not. Why would you put all of that responsibility or that responsibility in general on a traditionally white institution? They don't care about your black ass. Like, why would you do that?
And it depends. It depends.
I just see it as some people, I mean, I can't use my father as he's an anomaly, but for my mother, she grew up in DC. She didn't apply to Howard because she couldn't afford it. She lived in the projects, and the only school that she got into that offered her a full ride was Skidmore College in upstate New York. And it's one of those schools where it's not an Ivy League, but a lot of rich white people go there. And so she was like, would that have been my first choice? Hell no, but they were paying.
They showed me the money, right?
And so I left. And so when she got there, that was one of the first 2 years that the school first became co-ed. It used to be all female. And then also the other black students that were there mostly were from New York City, and came in through like magnet programs and things like that. And so she told me that, like, all we had was each other, and we had the BSU, which was raided my 3rd year there, and it was ransacked, and they never fixed it by the time she graduated. But, it was kind of, at least for her, it was kind of just like, I was there to go to school, get my degree, do what I got to do, and then get out. And this is in the 70s. So I feel like now, especially now that we're in this like Trump MAGA climate and all of these things, and that HBCU enrollments are rising, but of course there's still students going to TWIs. I just think that's kind of muddling it up a little more, where it's like, okay, if I'm in this white space for whatever reason, whether they had my program, they gave me money, whatever the reason is, and it's kind of like, okay, and this is the school's demographics, and I'm like one of 40 black people on this campus, I got to make it work. And so it's not to say that that person still can't find their black identity or whatever you want to call it. I think it's different than from someone who's at an HBCU. They're affirmed. Everybody looks like you. They may be different and be from different places, different identities and things like that, but they're still black. So I don't necessarily think that I think it's just a matter of like someone's personal feelings. I feel like some of these people are not keeping it 100 and are, putting them, you're crying behind a smiling mask saying, oh, I had a great experience, da 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 da. And it's kind of like he does protest too much. Like, if you had a great experience, great. No one's taking that away from you. I can't take that away from you. I can't erase that you had a great time at Ohio State. But it's like, you don't have to, I feel like if you had a good experience, you don't have to affirm your experience by downing somebody else's.
So y'all are not here for for HBCU-ish.
Hell no.
So if I wear that shirt to the Christmas party, y'all will be mad. Even though I went to an HBCU.
Ain't no Christmas party.
It will be, so I can hand out candy corn as a gift bag. So when we come back,
Hell no.
when we come back, our last segment, we're going to talk Donald Trump coming to an HBCU. Digest After Dark. We'll be right back. Digest After Dark, and we're rounding out our conversation. Just a special plug. Tiffany is going to be live streaming Thanksgiving from Frankfort, Kentucky this year. So be sure to tune in on her Facebook page for a Brockington Thanksgiving.
Where's Dr. Carter? Let's my phone upstairs.
Let's get into a conversation about the big story that is to come this weekend, which is President Donald Trump, who's going to be making keynote remarks at a criminal justice reform, I guess you could call it conference, that's being hosted at Benedict College.
Is this his
in Columbia, South Carolina? So it's not his conference. It's a third party. And he's not the only political person that'll be there. A lot of the other Democratic candidates will also be making remarks. And I mean a lot of them. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. So it runs the gamut of a full political presentation in a key caucus state, early caucus state. But by the time we hear it, all we hear is Donald Trump coming to an HBCU.
Right.
So I got a lot of heat today, as I'm prone to do, because my sense was, if you want HBCUs to be relevant, and we're saying that HBCUs are like every other school, and then you have to deal with what every other school does, which is invite political candidates and political figures to campus. And they catch the same heat that we do. If you're in Mississippi and a Democrat comes, the Republicans or the conservatives on that campus don't like it. But they still invite them. If you are at a liberal campus and you invite a conservative speaker, the liberals don't like it. We see that in California all the time, but they still invite them. One, because that's what college is. Two, because that's the political process of political candidates and figures trying to cultivate support and votes. Do you imagine? So that's my take. You can't complain about this. You can hate him, but you can do two things at one time. You can hate Trump and accept the fact that he can speak on your campus. We're fully capable of having two thoughts and two frames from which to operate. That's not something black folks are incapable of doing. But do you think that this is an exception? One, because it's Donald Trump and he's so reviled for being a racist, for being unfit for office, that this is an exception that he comes to an HBCU to make remarks of any kind, particularly on criminal justice, which his administration has spearheaded and which most black folks have supported in a bipartisan fashion. Is it just beyond the pale for this parent?
Is it that he was invited by virtue of his office?
Yes.
If that's the case, then I'm.
It was by virtue of his office. It's not like they said we specifically want Donald Trump to come talk about this.
Right.
The invite was, we want the president of the United States and we want candidates for the president of the United States to come talk about criminal justice reform.
And that reminds me of what what President Frederick had to make clear to Howard University when Betsy DeVos came through. She sits on the board by virtue of her office. If he has to do something or he's invited to do something by virtue of his office, then that's just what it is. You just either you gonna show up and do what's within your right as an American citizen, which is your right to protest, right, freedom of speech. If you gonna do what you gotta do, then do what you gotta do. If not, you just don't. But you really can't. You shouldn't waste time complaining about something that somebody has to do because of the office that they occupy.
It surprises me.
I don't expect for him to say anything profound. He don't know how.
If he's taking questions, I expect for him to say something crazy.
Right.
But
he's gonna have sound bites for days.
So
period.
One of the things that surprised me, Laurel, is that almost like Trump supporters, where everything you say, they just say, well, it's not true. I don't believe it. He's great. He's working hard, X, Y, and Z. No matter what he does or what gets said, they still support him. Because one of the things that came out, at least in the editorial I did today, was like, some good things have happened for HBCUs over the last 3 years under the Trump administration, right? And even when you show people the statistics, they say, okay, thanks for that information, I don't care. Which is their right. Which is their right. You can separate the stats from the person. Absolutely. But why do you think it is that it doesn't move the meter on accepting, like, okay, a guy that you hate is the president, but therefore the president should be allowed time on your campus?
I mean, I don't know. I think people, and not just because it's Trump, but I think with anyone that we don't disagree with, we just get caught up in the fact that, oh, I hate them, I can't stand them. There's no a broken clock is right twice a day with me. They out. And that's not realistic. And honestly, this kind of same thing on a much lower scale happened at a white school a few years ago with he was like a Rush Limbaugh type. And the Alumni Association actually invited him to campus. And then other students on the campus, and I think maybe like a liberal organization petitioned against it and made such a big stink that the president had to step in and cancel the event because it was just getting too tenuous. Mm-hmm. But then he sent a letter to the campus basically saying that one, the school was not behind this. This was the alumni group invited him to campus. And then two, because this is a college campus, we're hired a silo, but we're not a silo. And you have to invite, how do you learn and grow if you're always in an echo chamber? Right. You're always around people that think exactly like you and agree with you on everything. And he also said that, honestly, this would have been a great chance for you guys as students to really put him to task and question him on the things he said. And so I think people just they're not thinking the long game. They're just thinking of the immediacy of I don't want him here. I can't stand him, blah, blah, blah. So regardless of Trump and whatever nonsense he does today or tomorrow, it's kind of for right now, he's still in executive office. And the ball is kind of in our court as HBCUs. So I feel like as students or even just other members of the campus, they should use that opportunity. Now, I'm not saying that this may turn out with any more jewels of benefit to us, but at the same time, I think it's a great opportunity for them as a campus to, one, rally together, but two, show up and really put him to task. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, I feel like his side, because they're ridiculous, they'll still spin it as, oh, he was attacked on their campus and everyone was acting like animals. That's going to happen. But I just feel like regardless, the facts do matter in this case. So I feel like as long as they at least band together as a community and still, show up, but show out respectfully, but also make it clear that okay, we don't necessarily agree with you. This is why we have questions. So yeah, hopefully that happens.
Somebody called. Go ahead, Winston.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask the question. Somebody called me this morning and said, what do you think the difference is between Trump and Louis Farrakhan in terms of the way that the public either has or would receive them coming to campus? Because if you recall, Minister Farrakhan went on tour a couple of years ago of some HBCUs, and everywhere he went, almost the schools had to almost apologize, saying, we invite diverse speakers to campus. We don't agree with everything he says. And the truth of the matter is Farrakhan's about 20, 30 years from his heyday in the 80s and 90s when he was really going off. I think a lot of students today see the minister and they have this one impression. Go look up Louis Farrakhan on Phil Donahue and see what the minister was about in the mid 80s.
White devil.
Right.
So what I'm saying is there a difference when you think about controversial, politically charged figures on our side that black folks have to apologize for, and then controversial, politically charged figures on the other side, which black folks have to apologize for? Is there any space where HBCUs can do what any other college or university would do?
I think the difference is between black people who are politically charged, spicy, however you want to put it, and white people is white people have bite behind what it is they saying they do. That's how institutional and systemic racism works.
Again, go look up Phil Donahue, Louis Farrakhan.
Okay, but Farrakhan can say whatever he wants to say, and people who have black people who have polarizing opinions can say and do whatever they want to say. They still don't have the bite to make that work or to affect white people or other black people or non-white people or people in America the way that white people and white systems do.
I think that we're evolving. After all, Howard had Kanye West and Betsy DeVos on campus during homecoming. Y'all said not a nary word.
That is not true.
And that's also
and
not what
I would like to say for the record, Kanye was at Wilberforce first, and y'all ain't say not nary a goddamn thing.
Laurel,
And
did you go to
that
Sunday
Kanye
service?
later went to George Washington University. So
And they got money. I don't even want to hear it.
The question
But
is,
people only care when it's Howard or the trifecta plus. He was at Wilberforce first, and our girl did that.
Laurel, did you go to Sunday service?
I absolutely did not. First of all, Laurel didn't know about it. Laurel woke up at 1
They didn't
p.m. the
tell
next
nobody.
day and got on Twitter and was like, "Oh, okay," and rolled over.
Again,
I'm
this is
old.
not the
I'm
same
not gonna be
Kanye
out
from
there at
years
6
ago.
a.m. at all. Absolutely.
She
not.
said, I'm old.
Kanye quit Howard years ago. This new Kanye,
Kanye said, I stand on the on the yard of Howard University. Do I look canceled?
yes, you are. The Kanye that was booed a decade ago, that's our Kanye. He was canceled.
And he's back.
New Kanye, who's just out here in this world doing whatever, possibly unmedicated and unmanaged Kanye. Nah.
Y'all do know that most of the people in that crowd were his team.
Right.
In the
Thank
choir.
you very much.
The students,
Like fake news.
the students said nothing.
No, you are not going to do that.
That's not, no, it's true. Because you can't be the school of let's run up in the A building on Thursday. And as you said,
again,
unmedicated, unmanaged, Oval Office meltdown, Kanye West was on campus.
You know how many people just roll up to my campus and pull out a table and do something? Please.
You're right.
I don't understand.
No, people literally will roll up to Howard and just set up shop and do whatever they're doing and say that they did it at Howard. I've seen it.
Did anybody stop Sunday service? Because y'all stopped the A building for days.
You know what?
Did
But
anybody?
the stage was still up from yard
I forgot who I was
fest. He just
moment.
rolled up on over there.
Recording for the public. Darren likes to hear what you say and then rewrites it in his own mind. And says it out.
I'm asking the question.
forgot.
That is true.
Because I'm tired of seeing it. I promise you I am.
And we might talk about that on a future episode. That's coming
No,
up.
we can't.
Is that this
We
weekend?
can't, 'cause if we do, we got to talk about
It
XYZ.
sure
I don't think
is.
Are you going to Geo?
for me.
I sure am.
You didn't go to
Oh,
Sunday
nice.
service, but going to Geo. Nice to know. Thanks for listening to Dodgers After Dark. Remember to tune in for a Brockington Thanksgiving
What the
next month, live on
okay.
live on Facebook Watch. Also, thank you for tuning in to Dodgers After Dark on Sirius 142 HBCU, the pride of Howard University's radio network. Again, Tiffany, are we doing this next week?
Sure, why not?
We're going to preview the Brockington Thanksgiving, right? With Rosita.
Actually, yes, we will.
We
Yes.
might.
Nice.
Dodgers After Dark. Until next time, peace.